Hey guys, Kid Aikino here. We're past the end of the Millennium Godzilla series, past Gamera the Brave, and we're now firmly in that weird period between those movies and Legendary's Pacific Rim and Godzilla. First up, we've got D-War, or Dragon Wars, Shim Hyung-rae's triumphant return to giant monster movies, this time based on a Korean legend. I honestly love this movie because it's got Reptilian's utter lack of any grasp on reality beyond the logic of Hollywood blockbusters, but it's an infinitely more polished production. The protagonist and his love interest completely accept their roles as heroes in a fantasy story and act accordingly, with no self-awareness about how strange their behavior must appear to the people around them who live in modern-day Los Angeles. The movie version, anyway. Craig Robinson is the only person in the whole thing who seems to live in the real world, and his riffing on Jason Behr's fantasy protagonist bullshit is absolute gold, made even better by how hard Behr and Amanda Brooks deadpan the absolute nonsense the script gives them to say and do.
Does Sarah have a last name?
I don't know.
That's great. You're a great reporter, I will tell you that.
There's also the way the fantasy action is worked into the film. There's an extended flashback to feudal Korea near the beginning where there's all kinds of fanciful wuxia and tokusatsu style action going on, and you kind of accept it in that setting, but then you get stuff in the modern day like this sudden cut to Robert Forster doing floating meditation, followed by the evil general guy walking down the street dressed like this in broad daylight, and then a gag with an old lady trying to copy his walking through a wall. And that's the other thing, the tone. The whole movie is littered with really broad humor, like this homeless guy getting splashed by an ambulance.
You lousy bum!
Get it? And then there's not Kevin James, who sees the evil serpent monster at the zoo, is dismissed as crazy by the police, and is next seen in a straitjacket being made to recant his testimony. I know this is America, but I don't think our mental health care system is quite that bad, though it's hard to tell exactly how much of this is a gag and how much is the genuine guileless quality that allows the film to drop stuff like this.
Department has a very sophisticated paranormal unit.
Like it's nothing. That said, while the action and special effects aren't quite up to the standard of Hollywood films at the time, they are a massive improvement over Reptilian. Supposedly, the CGI caused the film's budget to skyrocket from the originally reported $35 million to more like $99 million. The big battle in downtown LA is incredibly entertaining, so much so that the actual climax, which takes place in some CGI fantasy realm, feels like kind of a letdown. But when Amanda Brooks finally sacrifices herself to allow the MacGuffin inside her to turn the good serpent into a dragon so it can triumph over the evil one, and then the dragon sheds a single perfect tear before flying off to the strains of the Korean folk song Arirang, while Brooks's voice promises Jason Behr that they'll be reunited in their next lives. Poetic cinema. Next up, there's Cloverfield. I remember being really excited for this movie when it came out, and while I wouldn't say it's a vital piece of kaiju cinema, I still think it's pretty fun. Most of the substance of it was really in the accompanying alternate reality game, which involved a backstory spanning decades involving unscrupulous corporations, cover-ups, disappeared whistleblowers, and other incidents leading up to the seemingly random chaos on the ground chronicled in the film, much like the long history of US intervention in the Middle East laying the groundwork for the sudden shock of the 9/11 attacks in 2001. There's a special feature on the Blu-ray that lets you watch the whole movie with annotations detailing a lot of this lore, but I think the movie still holds up on its own. I like the monster, the parasites are a neat secondary threat, and the found footage angle is both novel and thematically relevant. There's a lot that kinda strains the suspension of disbelief, like Beth running around with everybody else after being impaled on a piece of rebar minutes earlier, or the camera surviving this drop at the end, but overall it's good entertainment. I also have to give kudos to Michael Giacchino's end credits theme Roar, which is the only piece of American monster movie music this century that I would consider as striking and memorable as the work of genre greats like Akira Ifukube and Max Steiner. Next up, we've got Deep Sea Monster Reigo, an independent kaiju film from director Shinpei Hayashiya. It's a World War II period piece about the battleship Yamato encountering a giant monster during the war. The concept is interesting, but the execution is lacking. Even allowing for the film's very low budget, it's just generally poorly made, It's got its stylish moments, but the majority of the functional cinematography is flat and dull, with not nearly enough variety. The sound recording is pretty bad as well. There's a lot of awkward humor with Yukijiro Hotaru thrown into an otherwise rather straight fantasy action film, and I understand why an indie kaiju film would want some practical monster effects, but the use of the practical Reigo is so fleeting and so unmotivated that I don't really see the point. It's a neat concept, I'll give it that, but that alone doesn't make a good film. Next we have Monster X Strikes Back: Attack the G8 Summit, a comedic reboot of The X from Outer Space. This at least features better production value than Reigo, but it's mostly based around broad and shockingly unfunny political satire, as world leaders try to deal with Guilala, portrayed partially through stock footage from the first film. The kaiju veterans among the cast are fine, but hardly any of the foreigners can act. There's a twist that makes The Interview look like a thoughtful piece of political commentary. I'll give it points for the gag with the little kid at the conference wanting to name the monster, and the giant Daimajin-type character voiced by Takashi Kitano, but that's about it. Finally, there's Raiga, the follow-up to Reigo. This one throws out the most interesting part of Reigo, which was the period setting, and doubles down on the awful comedy. There are more practical monster effects in this one, which is nice, and there's another decent genre-savvy gag with the military brass having no time to prepare a monster figure, but this is another really poorly made film. The extended Reigo flashback is honestly a relief. It gives us a break from this movie. After this and Reigo, I gotta tell ya, I'm honestly a lot less interested in Hayashiya's elusive Gamera 4 fan film. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Next time we finish out the Wilderness Years with another Western novelty and another bad Japanese comedy, then hit the Kaiju Renaissance with Pacific Rim and the 2014 Godzilla. Until then, thanks for watching, and big thanks to my patrons, especially Bob Burns, Exploder Button, John Paneer, Kiefer Bielman, and Ryan Clark. You can join them in supporting this channel and my film preservation work at the Patreon link in the description. I'll see you next time.